I found out my parents wanted to pay for my sister's honeymoon with the money from my wedding. My mother started talking about financial maturity in the middle of a cake tasting, and I remember sitting there with a tiny fork in my hand thinking, wow, this woman really can turn buttercream into a lecture. The bakery was one of those places trying very hard to look casual while charging rent-level prices for frosting, and my fiancé kept giving me that sideways look like, are we doing this right now? Apparently we were. My mother smiled at the woman behind the counter, waited until she walked away, and then said, couples who wanted a stable future didn't waste money trying to impress other people. My father nodded like she had just delivered a keynote speech. My sister, who had come just to help, suddenly got very interested in her coffee lid. The thing that made me feel crazy wasn't even the comment itself. My mother had always had a way of saying insulting things in a tone that made you sound dramatic if you reacted. It was the timing. My sister had gotten married 2 months earlier in a ceremony so expensive I still don't know how they justified it without bursting into flames from hypocrisy. There were flowers hanging from the ceiling, imported linens, some ridiculous string trio playing arrangements of songs nobody in our family had ever listened to voluntarily, and a dessert display that looked like a museum exhibit about sugar. My parents paid for all of it. Happily. Loudly. They practically glowed while writing checks. Meanwhile, my fiancé and I were planning something nice but normal. We both worked full-time. We had rent, student loans, his car repair that kept turning into another car repair, and the kind of grocery bill that makes you stand in the aisle holding yogurt like you're negotiating with a hostage situation. We wanted a good wedding, not a royal coronation. Still, every time my parents got involved, suddenly there was all this talk about being practical, cutting back, thinking long-term, not being frivolous. Funny how concern for the future showed up only when it was my turn. I tried not to jump to conclusions. I really did. I told myself maybe they were just more stressed now. Maybe my father had some issue at work. Maybe my mother had looked at their savings and panicked. Maybe I was being sensitive, because growing up in my family trains you to hear the insult before the sentence is even finished. My fiancé said he thought the whole thing smelled weird, which was his polite way of saying my family was pulling something, but I wasn't ready to hear that yet. There is a specific kind of humiliation in realizing the people who are supposed to love you have been running the same pattern on you for years, and you still keep trying to rename it. At the tasting, my mother went on about how smart couples start marriages with discipline, how it wasn't the day that mattered but the life after it, how anyone mature would understand that. I just sat there nodding because if I opened my mouth too soon, I was going to say, that's amazing, because when my sister wanted a 6-foot ice sculpture of her initials, nobody suddenly discovered some finance guru. My father started asking whether we really needed an open bar. My sister made this little face like she didn't want to be there, which honestly annoyed me more than if she had joined in. She loved being the exception. She just preferred to enjoy it with clean hands. When we got back to our apartment that night, I kicked off my shoes so hard one of them hit the wall and my fiancé said, okay, so we're past pretending that was normal. I laughed, but it came out mean. I told him I knew the comments were unfair. I just didn't know yet whether they were unfair in the usual family way or unfair in some new, more creative way. He asked what the difference was. I said the usual version hurt my feelings. The creative version was going to cost me money. A few days later, I stopped by my parents' house after work because my mother had texted me one of those messages that looked casual and somehow still felt like a summons. Come by if you get a chance. No emoji. No exclamation point. Very mafia wife. I almost didn't go, but my dry cleaning was nearby, and some part of me still believed every unpleasant family interaction might eventually reveal a reasonable explanation. That part of me needed hobbies. My sister was already there, though not physically there for long. She was on speakerphone from wherever she was getting her nails done, or her hair done, or her life done, because she always managed to sound like she was reclining during every crisis. I heard her before I walked fully into the kitchen. She was talking about the honeymoon she and her husband wanted. Some absurd resort package with private dinners and a plunge pool and all the language travel websites use when they want to charge you extra for walls. My mother said, we'll figure it out. Don't stress. My father said they would move some things around. My sister sighed like a princess being briefed on wartime rations. I froze right there by the doorway, with my purse still on my shoulder, because suddenly every weird little lecture I had gotten over the past month slid into place so cleanly, it made me a little sick. My mother said my sister deserved one beautiful start after the pressure of planning such a large wedding. My father said it made sense to tighten things in other areas for now. Other areas. That was me. I was other areas. Nobody noticed me at first. They were too busy solving my sister's extremely urgent need to take bubble baths in another country. Then my mother turned, saw me standing there, and her whole face changed for half a second. It was tiny, but I caught it. Not guilt exactly. More like irritation that I had arrived before she could hide the silverware. She ended the call too quickly, asked if I wanted coffee, and started moving around the kitchen with that frantic little energy people get when they've been caught and are hoping motion will replace explanation. I said no, sat down, and made myself act normal. That took more energy than going to the gym ever had. My mother started talking about napkin colors. My father asked how work was. I answered like a hostage reading approved lines. Every sentence in my body was trying to claw its way out, but I wanted to be sure. I needed them to keep talking. When people think you don't know something, they get lazy. My mother mentioned budgets again. My father said weddings were emotional traps for people who needed to impress others. I just nodded and said maybe they were right. That seemed to relax them, which was honestly insulting on a spiritual level. On the drive home, I had to pull into a grocery store parking lot because I got so angry my hands were shaking. Not dramatic shaking either, not movie shaking, just that ugly real-life kind where you grip the steering wheel too hard and start replaying old memories you thought were buried. My 8th grade dance dress that didn't fit in the budget after my sister got braces and a laptop in the same month. The college tour they skipped for me because gas was tight, right before paying for my sister's summer program in another state. The way every sacrifice in this family had somehow landed on my side of the table, and every splurge had wandered over to hers like it had legs. When I got home, my fiancé took one look at my face and muted the television. I told him everything, including the exact phrases, including the disgusting little phrase, other areas. And for once, he didn't do the careful thing where he tried not to criticize my family too directly. He just said, "So they're shrinking your wedding to fund your sister's honeymoon." Hearing it that plainly made something in me settle. Not because it hurt less, but because confusion had finally packed its bags and left. What was left was rage. Clean, useful rage. The kind that comes with a clipboard. I slept maybe 3 hours that night. The rest of the time I lay there staring at the ceiling, making lists in my head, crossing out the idea of being the bigger person, putting it back, crossing it out again. By morning, I wasn't calm exactly, but I was focused. My parents wanted us to be financially responsible? Fine. I was about to become the most financially responsible bride in the continental United States. The next afternoon, we met with the wedding planner in a tiny office above a flower shop, and I walked in carrying a notebook like I was about to defend a thesis titled, "Why My Family Has Lost Access to My Decisions." My fiancé sat next to me, calm as ever, though I could tell he was enjoying this more than he would ever admit. Not because he liked conflict. He just liked seeing me stop negotiating against myself. I told the planner we were cutting back, not because we had to, not because we were panicking, but because we were done pretending this event belonged to anybody except the 2 people getting married. She blinked at me once, probably trying to decide whether I was having some kind of bridal breakdown, and then she did the most beautiful thing a professional can do in a crisis. She got practical. She pulled up contracts, asked which items mattered to us, and started highlighting what could be dropped without burning the whole thing down. It turned out a shocking amount of our wedding had been designed to satisfy my parents' opinions. The larger venue my mother loved because it would photograph well. The caterer my father insisted was worth the extra cost because he had served them at some work gala, and apparently that made chicken morally superior. The guest list bloated with relatives I hadn't seen in years, and family friends who mostly existed to clap for my mother's taste level. The live band nobody but my parents cared about. The upgraded bar package, the elaborate welcome baskets for out-of-town guests, many of whom I strongly suspected would criticize the gift snacks while taking them home anyway. Once we started stripping things back, the wedding got better almost immediately. Smaller venue, warmer feel, less money, different menu, still good, nobody dies. A disc jockey instead of a band. Beer, wine, one signature cocktail, and adults would have to survive that hardship somehow. We cut the welcome baskets. We cut the luxury transportation my mother wanted for appearances. We cut a whole floral install that I had never even liked and had only agreed to because my mother said every real wedding needed one focal moment. I told the planner my new focal moment was going to be paying my own bills. Then we tackled the guest list. That part felt almost holy. Every person my parents had pushed in for family harmony, every cousin who only remembered my existence when there was food involved, every business contact of my father's, every woman my mother referred to as basically family, even though I had never once called her in a crisis, gone. My fiancé kept trying not to grin while I named names, But there is only so much dignity a man can maintain while watching his future wife trim resentment with a red pen. We got that list down to people we actually wanted. It was smaller, yes, but it felt breathable. When the planner asked about funding, I said very clearly that my fiancé and I would be paying for the wedding ourselves moving forward. All remaining decisions would go through us. No outside approvals. No checking with my mother. No calls from my father pretending to ask questions while quietly trying to veto choices. The planner, who had witnessed enough family power struggles to earn a minor degree in diplomacy, nodded like she had been waiting for us to say it. On the way out, my fiancé asked if I was sure I wanted to move that fast, not because he disagreed. He just knows me well enough to understand that when I get hurt, I can turn decisive in a way that looks a little like arson from a distance. I told him I was sure. My parents had spent my whole life training me to accept less while smiling about it. I wasn't doing that at my own wedding. Not for one more minute. That night, I wrote the email. Polite, organized, impossible to misread unless you were deeply committed to dishonesty. I thanked my parents for encouraging us to think more responsibly about our financial future. I explained that, inspired by their advice, we had adjusted the wedding to fit our actual priorities and budget. I listed the venue change, the vendor changes, the reduced guest list, the simplified reception plans, and the fact that my fiancé and I would be covering the event ourselves from that point on. I even said I appreciated their concern and hoped they would understand our decision to keep the day centered on what mattered most to us. I was so calm while writing it that I almost scared myself. Then I hit send and sat there with my phone on the table between us. My fiancé said, "How long do you think?" I said, "Under 10 minutes. My mother called in 7. She didn't open with hello. She opened with, "What exactly did you think you were doing?" Which felt efficient, if not loving. I put her on speaker because my fiancé hates when I keep my family chaos pressed to one ear like private self-harm. My mother said she was blindsided, embarrassed, hurt, confused, insulted, and somehow still the victim of a decision that affected my wedding more than hers. She asked why I would make such drastic changes without discussing them like an adult. That part almost made me laugh because apparently being an adult means asking permission before refusing to be managed. I told her I had discussed budget concerns with her repeatedly and had heard the same message every time. Be sensible, think long-term, stop trying to make the wedding bigger than it needed to be. So I took that advice seriously. We reduced costs, we simplified. We stopped expecting my parents to subsidize choices they clearly didn't support. My mother said that wasn't what she meant. I asked what she meant exactly, and the silence on the line was so satisfying I almost felt guilty for enjoying it. Almost. Then she started listing specific changes in that careful voice she uses when she's trying not to sound controlling while sounding extremely controlling. Why would we move to a smaller venue? Why would we remove family friends? Why would we switch to a disc jockey when everyone had been expecting live music? Why would we cut the premium bar? Why would we make it look like we were scaling down because there had been some problem? There it was. Not sadness, not concern, optics. My mother did not care if I had the wedding I wanted. She cared if anybody might think she had less power than she claimed. I asked her why she was more upset than I was. She said because mothers dream about their daughters' weddings. I said that was funny because she seemed to have had all her dream energy available for my sister. She told me not to be ugly. I told her not to be obvious. That was the point where my fiancé slowly stood up, mouthed, "Wow," and walked into the kitchen because he knows when a phone call has become a family heirloom. My mother insisted things were different now. Costs were higher. Timing was bad. People had already been stretched by my sister's wedding. I said exactly, which is why it was interesting that they were still discussing financing her honeymoon while telling me to cut centerpieces. She went very quiet then, and I knew I had hit the actual bone under all the polite fat. She asked where I had gotten that idea. I said from my own ears in her own kitchen while she talked about other areas, like I was a line item and not her daughter. She tried to recover fast, said I misunderstood, said they had only been brainstorming, said my sister had been emotional and they were trying to calm her down. I said of course, because when my sister cries, everyone reaches for their wallets. When I cry, everyone reaches for a lesson. That was mean, and I knew it the second it came out, but it was also true enough to sting. By then my father had joined the call, which always happens when my mother thinks I'm getting too close to a point she can't outmaneuver. He asked us all to calm down in that tired, measured voice that usually means he would like the women around him to stop making his evening inconvenient. He said nobody was taking anything from me, nobody was conspiring, and this whole conversation had become emotional and unfair. Emotional and unfair is family code for Marin has noticed the math again. I told them the decision was made. The wedding would move forward the way my fiancé and I wanted, on our money, with our guest list. My mother said I was punishing them. I said no, I was removing them from the budgeting process because they had abused the privilege. My father muttered something about disrespect. I said respect was not me performing gratitude while being treated like the cheaper daughter. The call ended badly. Not screaming badly, not slammed phone badly, but worse in a way. My mother said, "You are determined to turn this into something it isn't." I said, "No, I'm finally calling it what it is." Then I hung up, sat perfectly still for maybe 30 seconds, and cried so hard I got hiccups, which was annoying because righteous anger looks a lot cooler before the hiccups start. I barely had time to recover before my sister called. Not even 10 minutes later. She came in sweet, which should have warned me more than it did. My sister's sweetness was never free. It was the sample tray before the hard sell. She said she had heard Mom was upset and wanted to make sure I was okay because wedding stress can make people spiral. That word. Spiral. She said it the way people say, "bless your heart," when they want to legally get away with contempt. I told her I was fine. She said she actually thought some of our original plans had been kind of excessive, which was rich coming from a woman whose wedding had included personalized silk robes for bridesmaids she no longer speaks to. She said maybe scaling back would be better for us as a couple. More intimate. More authentic. She laid it on so thick I could practically hear her adjusting her halo. I let her talk because sometimes it's useful to see how long a person will keep lying when you hand them rope. Then she said Mom and Dad were relieved the wedding wouldn't be such a strain now because, there were other things going on. I asked, "Like your honeymoon?" The line went dead quiet. Not disconnected. Just silent in that offended way guilty people get when they realize the script has gone missing. She asked what I meant. I said I meant the resort package, the private dinners, the moving things around, the other areas. There was this tiny inhale, and that was it. Case closed. Her whole tone changed. Gone was the soft concern. Out came the real thing. She asked why I had been eavesdropping in our parents' house. I said I was standing in the kitchen of the house I grew up in, not crouched in an air vent. She told me I was twisting a conversation that had nothing to do with me. I actually laughed at that, which I admit was not helpful. I said a plan to reduce my wedding so they could fund her luxury trip had quite a lot to do with me, actually. She said nobody was reducing my wedding. They were just trying to stop me from making a spectacle of myself financially. That got me. Not even because it was cruel, though it was. Because it was so familiar. My sister has always framed her advantages as my moral failures. If she got more, it was because she needed it more. Deserved it more. Handled it better. Represented the family better. If I objected, I was jealous. If I got angry, I was unstable. If I withdrew, I was dramatic. It is honestly impressive how long one person can survive by weaponizing tone. I told her she didn't get to speak to me like some reckless child while planning a second paid celebration for herself. She said I was acting like a victim because I couldn't handle not being the center of attention. That one almost took my breath away. Her wedding had happened 2 months ago. Her honeymoon was becoming my budget problem. But sure, I was the one with attention issues. I wish I could say I stayed perfectly calm and landed every line with icy elegance. I didn't. I got petty. I told her maybe if she and her husband had focused less on curated romance and more on learning how to be married, she wouldn't need a second performance so soon. She went feral after that. Called me bitter, cheap, insecure, exhausting. Said everybody in the family was tired of my resentment. I said everybody in the family had made my resentment a group project. She started crying then, which she can do faster than some people can unlock a door. She said she couldn't believe I would ruin our parents' peace over money. Peace. That word had always meant silence from me. I told her I wasn't ruining peace. I was interrupting favoritism. There is a difference, though nobody in my family had ever had much interest in learning it. Before hanging up, she said, "You always do this. You turn everything ugly." I said, "No, I just stopped decorating it for you." Then I ended the call, threw my phone onto the couch, and immediately regretted not saying something even sharper. That's the worst thing about arguments with people who've been under your skin since childhood. You can say 10 truthful things and still spend the next hour wishing you'd thought of an 11th. For the next couple of days, my family did what my family always does when direct pressure fails. They outsourced. Suddenly, I was getting little check-in messages from relatives who had not texted me in months. My aunt called asking in a syrupy voice whether there had been a misunderstanding about the wedding. A cousin sent a message saying she hoped stress wasn't making me make permanent choices. Permanent choices. As if trimming a guest list was the same thing as joining a cult. Even one of my mother's so-called family friends reached out to say she had heard things were tense and wanted me to know that weddings bring out emotion in everyone. It was all very coordinated in that passive way people think hides their fingerprints. At first, I tried answering politely. I said we had simply decided to fund and plan the wedding ourselves. I said some details had changed and we were keeping things smaller. I said I appreciated concern but didn't want to discuss private family issues. That only made people bolder. My aunt asked whether my parents had done something so terrible that they deserved exclusion. My cousin said she couldn't imagine hurting mom like this after everything she'd done for me. That was a fun phrase. Everything she'd done for me. In my family, providing basic care while actively playing favorites apparently qualified someone for sainthood. My fiancé wanted me to block them all immediately. I told him I wasn't there yet. I still had this stupid leftover hope that if I explained carefully enough, one person would say, "Wow, that is unfair," and the pressure would crack a little. That did not happen. What happened was, I spent an entire Saturday answering manipulative messages while wearing old sweatpants and eating cereal straight from the box like a woman preparing for spiritual winter. My father finally called late that afternoon. He used his calm voice, which almost always means he has decided to play reasonable man against female chaos. He said he wanted to have a civilized conversation because things had gotten out of hand. I said they had gotten clear, not out of hand. He ignored that and started saying nobody had intended to hurt me, that my mother was devastated, that my sister felt attacked, that family harmony matters more than one event. One event. I loved that. My wedding had somehow become one event, while my sister's honeymoon was a matter of infrastructure. He kept framing the problem as tone, not the plan, not the favoritism, not the timing, just my reaction. Was it really necessary to make all these changes so abruptly? Was it really necessary to exclude people? Was it really necessary to send such a pointed email? There is something deeply maddening about being asked to be less hurt by someone who never had to live in the shape of the hurt. I asked him a simple question. If money was tight enough for them to discourage my wedding choices, why was it not too tight for them to pay for my sister's luxury honeymoon? He said circumstances were more complicated than I understood. I asked what circumstances. He said that wasn't the point. Exactly. Then he slipped and said the new version of the wedding would make people think there had been some kind of financial issue in the family. I said, "So this is about appearances." He said it was about dignity. I said dignity would have been telling me the truth instead of feeding me lectures while privately funding my sister again. He got quiet for a second and then said I was being cruel. That actually made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was so familiar. Whenever I refused to quietly absorb something, my family called the refusal cruelty. The wound was fine. The flinch was offensive. I told him my fiancé and I were happy with our choices and would not be reversing them. He said I would regret humiliating my parents over a misunderstanding. I said if they felt humiliated, that was probably because the situation was humiliating, and they had created it all by themselves. There was a long pause. Then he said in this tired old voice, "You always want things to be unfair." I swear that sentence sat in my chest like a brick. Not because it was clever, but because it was so wrong in such an intentional way. As if I had invented the scale that kept tipping away from me. After we hung up, I went into the bathroom and just stared at myself in the mirror for a minute. Mascara smudged. Hair half up, half giving up. Old shirt with a bleach mark near the hem. I looked like exactly what I was. A grown woman, one argument away from becoming 14 again. My fiancé knocked softly and asked if I was okay. I said yes, which was a lie. Then I opened the door and said, "Actually no, but I'm done pretending they don't mean it." That was the first honest thing I'd said all day. The following week should have been boring wedding admin, and in a normal family maybe it would have been. Seating chart, final menu, figuring out whether my future in-laws would be offended if we sat them near my old college roommate who swears when she laughs. Instead, I woke up every morning with that low electric dread of waiting for the next move. It came on a Thursday while I was at work trying to answer emails about invoices that had nothing to do with my emotional collapse. My sister texted, "I think I found a solution." That sentence alone was enough to make my left eye twitch. I ignored it for an hour, then 2 hours, then curiosity, that nasty little raccoon of a trait. 1. I stepped into the stairwell and called her. She answered on the first ring, way too pleased with herself. She said she had spoken to Mom and Dad, and they all agreed the situation had gotten bigger than it needed to be. I said congratulations on discovering scale. She pretended not to hear that and launched into her idea. Because the wedding was smaller now, she said, Maybe it would be more meaningful to make the celebration family-centered. She talked in that fake, gentle voice people use when they are trying to sell you a scam in the language of healing. The proposal was that my fiancé and I could have a simple ceremony, very intimate, and then instead of a larger reception or separate honeymoon plans, both couples could do a shared trip afterward to the resort she wanted. Mom and Dad would help pay for the family travel package, and everyone could create beautiful memories together without unnecessary extravagance. She really said unnecessary extravagance as if her own marriage hadn't recently been sponsored by excess. I just stood there in the stairwell holding my phone, staring at the cement wall like it might provide legal guidance. I asked her to repeat it because sometimes hearing something twice helps your brain accept that a real person said it out loud. She repeated it, slower this time, maybe thinking I was confused instead of offended. She said this way nobody would look like they were getting more than anyone else, and the family could move forward united. There it was. The entire rotten center of the thing. Not fairness. Camouflage. They didn't want to stop spoiling her. They just wanted a setup where my smaller wedding wouldn't make the comparison too obvious. I laughed. Not politely, not gracefully. I laughed so hard I had to lean against the wall, and that made her furious immediately. She said she was trying to help. I said no. She was trying to turn my wedding into a cover story for her second subsidized vacation. She told me I was being disgusting. I said what was disgusting was asking me to wrap my marriage around her honeymoon so our parents could save face. She said I was selfish. I said absolutely, yes. As it turns out, I am deeply selfish about my own wedding. Then she made the mistake of saying Mom and Dad were only making the offer because they felt guilty about how sensitive I had been lately. Sensitive. I swear that word could make me commit minor property damage. I told her I was done. Not just done with the proposal. Done with this weird family theater where everybody keeps trying to convince me that taking less is maturity and objecting to it is instability. She started crying again. But this time it didn't move me. Maybe that makes me cold. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe after enough years, the sound stops meaning pain and starts meaning strategy. I told her she and my parents were officially not invited to the wedding anymore. Full stop. No compromise, no special appearance, no, we'll talk later when things cool down. She actually gasped. Which was funny because I had been gasping internally for half my life. She said I couldn't do that. I said, watch me. She asked what I would tell people. I said probably the truth, which was that my family had mistaken my wedding for an expense category. Then I hung up. I went back to my desk looking so strange that one of my coworkers asked whether I needed fresh air. I said I needed a new bloodline, but air would do for now. In the parking lot after work, I called the planner and then the venue. I made sure nobody was to release information or make changes based on instructions from my parents or sister. Passwords on everything. Guest list updated. Security at the venue aware that 3 people were no longer welcome. It felt dramatic while I was doing it, and then it felt embarrassingly necessary. That was the theme of the month, honestly. Every boundary I set looked extreme right up until the exact moment somebody proved why I needed it. Once the uninviting became real, my parents switched from offended to apocalyptic. My mother sent paragraphs about betrayal, heartbreak, public humiliation, family cruelty, and the shame of explaining my behavior to people who loved me. That last part almost made me toss my phone across the room. People who loved me. She was still talking like access to me was a community asset and not something she had been misusing for years. My father sent shorter messages, which is somehow worse. He has a talent for sounding disappointed in a way that tries to recruit your own conscience against you. This has gone too far. You are making a lasting mistake. There will be consequences for this kind of rupture. Consequences. Like he was my principal. I didn't answer immediately. I wanted to. I had drafts in my head so sharp they could have sliced drywall. But my fiancé said something that stopped me. He asked whether I wanted to communicate or whether I wanted to bleed on paper. I said both, ideally. He said only one of those would help. Annoying man. Useful, but annoying. So I waited until the next morning and then I called them together, because if I was going to say it once, I wanted witnesses. My mother sounded like she had been crying for hours. My father sounded like he had already decided this story would someday be told with me as the villain and him as the weary survivor. I told them the decision stood. They were not invited. My sister was not invited. I was not interested in discussing alternatives, apologies that blamed my reaction, or fresh explanations that somehow still avoided the basic truth. My mother started saying they had always supported me. I cut her off and asked if she genuinely expected me to believe combining my wedding with my sister's honeymoon plan was anything but grotesque favoritism. My father said I was fixating on one bad idea and destroying years of family over it. That phrase got to me because it made it sound so isolated, so random, as if the problem had dropped from the ceiling last Thursday. I told him this wasn't one bad idea. It was a pattern with good lighting. It was every time I got the speech while she got the check. Every time my disappointment was called immaturity and her demands were called standards. Every time they acted like I was difficult for noticing. My voice cracked halfway through that, which I hated, but I kept going. I said I was done showing up to be managed. My mother asked, in this tiny, injured voice, whether I really wanted to get married without my parents there. And I swear, that question broke something open in me because the honest answer was no. Of course not. I wanted normal parents. I wanted a mother who showed up to help me choose a dress without making me feel like my joy needed committee approval. I wanted a father who cared more about how I felt than how the reception would look. I wanted all the stupid basic things people complain about and then miss later. But wanting them and having them were not the same thing, and I was tired of pretending hope could substitute for reality. So I said, I want to get married without being used. Silence. Thick, ugly silence. My mother started crying harder. My father said I was cruel again. Maybe I was. Maybe truth sounds cruel when it arrives years after it was due. After the call, I blocked my sister. Then I blocked my mother for one full day because I needed one day where my phone didn't feel like a haunted object. I didn't block my father yet, which in hindsight was me leaving one emotional window cracked open for a storm. I spent that weekend doing normal things on purpose. Laundry, grocery shopping, returning a pair of shoes I had panic bought online at 1 a.m, sitting on the floor with my fiancé while we sorted table cards. There was something almost absurd about folding socks while your family implodes, but I think that absurdity saved me. It reminded me that life keeps asking for small, practical things even when your emotions are convinced the world has cracked in half. Late Sunday night, my father sent one more message. You may be angry now, but someday you will understand what we were trying to do. I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back, I understand exactly what you were trying to do. That's the problem. After that, I blocked him too. The weird thing about cutting off your family before your wedding is that the logistics are easier than the grief. The logistics are annoying, sure, but they can be handled with lists. Remove names, update catering numbers, reprint place cards, tell the planner, tell the venue, tell the friend who was supposed to pick my parents up from their hotel that she can now enjoy an extra hour of peace and probably a pastry. Those are tasks. Tasks are kind. Tasks end. Grief is messier. Grief sits down beside you while you're trying on your altered dress and whispers, this is the part where your mother was supposed to cry and tell you you look beautiful. Grief shows up when your future mother-in-law asks if you want help with welcome bags, and you suddenly need to fake a cough because kindness from the wrong direction can feel like being gently stabbed. Grief is realizing you aren't mourning the relationship you had. You're mourning the one you kept rehearsing in your head. The one where eventually your parents would see you clearly if you just loved them hard enough and stayed calm enough and achieved enough and forgave enough. My fiancé was steady through all of it, which sounds sweet and is sweet, but it was also irritating in moments because steady people make your chaos look louder by comparison. He would sit on the couch and listen while I circled the same 10 memories like an emotional airport. He never once told me to reconcile for the sake of the wedding. Not once. He said if I wanted to revisit the decision later, that should come from peace, not guilt. And definitely not because my family had found a fresh way to perform distress. He said the wedding should feel safe. Such a simple word. Safe. I realized I had never actually expected that from family events. Just survival, maybe a few compliments, and hopefully no tears in a bathroom. My standards had been underground. Work became weird too, because apparently if your personal life is melting, spreadsheets still want numbers, and clients still want answers, and your boss still wants things done before lunch. One afternoon, I had to excuse myself to the supply closet, because my mother's friend left me a voicemail saying my mother was not sleeping, and maybe I should think about whether being right was worth that. I sat on a box of printer paper and laughed so hard I almost scared myself, as if my mother's sleep had always been my responsibility, as if being right were some extra luxury I had picked for fun. Around that time, my sister found a way around the block by emailing me from an address I had forgotten existed. The message was long, emotional, and somehow still entirely about her. She said my actions had put her in an impossible position with our parents. She said her husband felt uncomfortable being involved in family tension. She said she had never asked for special treatment, which was an amazing lie considering she had accepted it her whole life like room service. Then she added the line that told me everything I needed to know. I can't believe you'd make my first months of marriage about your resentment. Your resentment. Not the plan. Not the favoritism. Just my unpleasant reaction to it. Classic. I didn't answer. I forwarded it to a folder and then, because I am not above low-level pettiness in times of emotional emergency, I renamed the folder Evidence of Nonsense. My fiancé saw that and laughed for the first time in days. It felt good. Not because anything was fixed, but because humor is one of the only things that can sit in the same room as humiliation without making it bigger. The dress fitting without my mother was harder than I expected. I brought my friend instead, and she was wonderful in the practical way some women are wonderful. She adjusted the back, hyped me up, took terrible photos on purpose to make me laugh, and only asked if I was okay once, which I appreciated. Too much sympathy can feel like being wrapped in wet towels. But when the seamstress zipped me up and I looked in the mirror, I had this sudden painful thought that my mother would have loved the dress specifically because it made me look, in her words, expensive. I hated that she could still live in my head like that. I hated even more that part of me still wanted her approval, even now, even after everything. There is no dignity in old wiring. It just sparks when it wants to. That night, I told my fiancé I felt stupid for still being sad. He said sadness didn't mean I was wrong. It just meant I was not a robot, which frankly was the bare minimum compliment, but still useful. Then he handed me takeout and said the seating chart still needed work, because apparently healing and alphabetizing can coexist. About 3 weeks before the wedding, my future mother-in-law offered to host a small shower at her house. Not a giant thing, not matching outfits and forced games and public crying, just lunch, cake, a few women I actually liked, and maybe one decorative banner trying a little too hard. Under normal circumstances, I probably would have found it sweet and mildly embarrassing. Under my circumstances, it felt loaded in ways nobody intended. I said yes because saying no to kindness had started to feel like letting my family win twice. The shower was lovely in that awkward homemade way money can't fake. Folding chairs in the yard, bowls of fruit sweating in the heat, my fiancé's aunt bringing pasta salad like it was an Olympic event. There were little presents and bad jokes and one candle that smelled like linen and judgment. For a couple of hours, I actually relaxed. I let myself enjoy being celebrated by people who weren't trying to leverage the celebration into influence. And then, because my family apparently believes timing is a love language, my mother showed up. She did not crash through the gate sobbing, thank God. She walked in carrying a gift bag and wearing one of her respectable woman under strain outfits, which means neutral colors and earrings that imply she still has standards despite the heartbreak. Everybody went quiet in that awful social way where no one knows whether to greet, freeze, or pretend the lemonade needs urgent attention. I just stood there with a paper plate in my hand and felt my body go cold from the inside out. My mother smiled at the group like this was difficult but noble, then looked at me and said she only wanted 5 minutes. 5 minutes, as if emotional ambushes run on microwaves. My future mother-in-law, who is usually very polite, stepped slightly closer to me and asked whether I wanted her to leave. I appreciated that so much I nearly cried on the spot. I said yes. Simple. Yes. Please. My mother's face changed immediately. Offended, then wounded, then furious, like channels flipping too fast. She said she had brought a gift and didn't think it was unreasonable for a mother to attend her daughter's shower. I said it was unreasonable for a mother who had been uninvited from the wedding to ignore that boundary, because a backyard felt less official. She lowered her voice and said we did not need to make a scene. Again with the scene. Everything in my family becomes a scene the moment I stop cooperating. I told her leaving would prevent one. Staying would create one. Those were the available options. Then she did the thing I had feared most. She started crying in front of everybody. Not loud crying. Controlled, trembling, elegant crying. The kind designed for witnesses. She said she didn't know what had happened to me, and that she had only ever tried to help me build a beautiful life. I said, Mom, not here. My voice was shaking, which I hated, because nothing makes manipulative people bolder than evidence that they still have a hand on your nervous system. My future mother-in-law stepped in before I had to say more. She told my mother very calmly that this was not the place, and if she cared about me at all, she would stop turning private conflict into public pressure. I will love that woman forever for that sentence alone. My mother looked at her like she had been slapped by etiquette itself. Then she set the gift bag on the table, said she hoped I would one day regret this less than she did, and left. The whole yard stayed quiet for a second after the gate closed. Then my friend, God bless her, said, "Well, that was deeply weird," and everybody exhaled at once. Someone offered more cake. Somebody else turned the music up a little. The party resumed, sort of, but I was gone emotionally. I went into the bathroom and cried in a stranger's hand towel for maybe 10 minutes. Not because I doubted my decision, because boundary setting always sounds empowering until you have to do it while holding a paper plate in front of nice people. When I came back out, nobody made a fuss. That helped. My future mother-in-law hugged me once and then asked whether I wanted coffee. I said yes. She said, "Good. Come help me in the kitchen." It was such an ordinary sentence, but it gave me something to do with my hands besides shake. Later that evening, after everybody left, I looked inside the gift bag. It was a framed photo of me, my mother, and my sister from years ago, back when I still thought squinting through discomfort counted as family closeness. No note, just the picture. I stared at it for a long time and then put it face down in the closet. Some gestures are not apologies, they are props. The shower stunt changed something in me. Up until then, some part of me had still believed the wedding itself might be left alone if I held firm. After that, I stopped assuming decency would save me effort. I had the planner confirm security again. I sent photos of my parents and sister to the venue coordinator, which felt surreal and vaguely trashy, like starring in a very low-budget scandal. I updated my friend who was handling guest check-in. She asked if I wanted her to be extra nice or extra terrifying. I said a tasteful blend. The week of the wedding was supposed to be all excitement and nerves and maybe one fight about envelopes. Instead, it was this strange mix of practical joy and emotional landmines. My fiancé and I picked up our rings. We packed for our short honeymoon. We argued about whether he had enough shirts and whether I had packed too many shoes, which was reassuring because it sounded like a normal couple with normal problems. Then I'd glance at my phone and see 3 missed calls from an unknown number, and my body would tense before my brain caught up. My father tried one last time 2 nights before the rehearsal dinner by calling from his office line. I answered because apparently suffering teaches you very little if you're me. He did not apologize. He did not acknowledge the shower. He said he wanted to prevent a public disaster and asked whether there was still a path for them to attend quietly, sit in the back, and avoid further conflict. Quietly, sit in the back. Like I was denying refugee status instead of saying no to people who kept treating my wedding as a battleground and then a stage. I asked him whether he could say plainly that what they had done was wrong. Not complicated, not misunderstood. Wrong. He went silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, "I think everyone made mistakes." There it was. The family classic. Mutualize the damage until accountability evaporates. I said no. No path, no back row, no symbolic appearance for optics. He sighed like I had failed a test and said my mother was shattered. I said maybe she should sit with why. He said very coldly, "You are not the only person hurting." I said, "I know. I'm just the only one you keep asking to absorb it." Then I hung up and blocked that number too. The rehearsal dinner itself was smaller than originally planned, partly because of the wedding changes and partly because I no longer had patience for ceremonial excess. It ended up being one of the best nights of the whole process. My fiancé's family was warm without being invasive. My friend gave a toast that was funny enough to make me snort water. My future mother-in-law raised her glass and said she hoped our marriage would always feel easier than the planning, which got the biggest laugh of the night because the bar was on the floor and still somehow accurate. For a few hours, I forgot to brace. Then, in the hotel room afterward, I made the mistake of checking the social media app I hadn't deleted yet. My sister had posted a quote graphic about protecting your peace from people who weaponize old grudges. No names, obviously, because cowards love ambiguity when they want sympathy from strangers. But then there was a photo in the next post of her and my mother at lunch, smiling, caption about family being everything when life gets hard. I just stared at it, exhausted beyond anger. My fiancé took the phone gently out of my hand and said, "You do know they want you agitated tonight, right?" I said yes. He said, "Then let them be pathetic by themselves." Harsh. Fair. I slept badly anyway. I kept dreaming I was late, or barefoot, or standing at the front of the room while somebody whispered, "Your mother is outside." At 4 a.m, I got up and sat by the window in the dark, wearing one of those matching pajama sets my friend had insisted on buying me. The city outside was quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you think maybe everybody else has mastered life and you're the only one awake negotiating with old wounds. My fiancé woke up, found me there, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and didn't ask me to explain. We just sat there until the room started turning gray. Sometimes love is very glamorous. Sometimes it is just someone staying awake with you so the thoughts don't get too loud. Wedding mornings in movies always look like champagne and satin and women shouting lovingly about mascara. Mine was more like controlled breathing, coffee gone cold 3 times, and me trying not to interpret every buzz of my phone as a fresh act of emotional terrorism. I had blocked everyone relevant, But anxiety does not care about logic. Anxiety is like, what if the florist becomes your mother somehow? Still, once the hair and makeup people started moving around the room and my friend put music on and somebody shoved a pastry into my hand, the day began to gather shape around me instead of the other way around. Getting dressed without my family there felt strange, but not in the way I had feared. Sad, yes. There were little absences that lit up all over the room like tiny missing bulbs. No mother adjusting my veil. No father knocking awkwardly before seeing me in the dress. No sister pretending to be supportive while making the day about her hydration level. But there was also peace. Nobody criticizing. Nobody steering. Nobody turning sentiment into performance. I could actually hear myself think. That was new. Right before the ceremony, the venue coordinator came in and said quietly that everything was under control, and there had been no issues at the entrance. She probably meant it as a routine update. I almost hugged her for it. I realized then how tightly I had been holding the possibility of disruption, like some part of me still expected my family to burst in and demand one final rewrite. When that didn't happen, my body softened all at once and I had to sit down because relief can hit almost like grief. Walking down the aisle was harder and easier than I expected. Harder because there is no elegant way to not notice who isn't there. Easier because the people who were there actually wanted me well. My friend walked me, which had started as a practical adjustment and ended up feeling perfect. She squeezed my hand right before we stepped out and whispered, "Nobody here gets to ruin this." I believed her. Maybe for the first time all month I fully believed something good was allowed to stay good. My fiancé looked wrecked when he saw me, in the best possible way. Not polished wedding magazine wrecked. Real wrecked. Eyes shiny, smile shaking, trying very hard not to cry because he knew if he cried first I would lose it completely. That expression carried me through the whole ceremony. Not because it fixed the hurt. Because it made the hurt smaller than the life in front of me. There is a huge difference. The ceremony itself was simple and warm, and almost suspiciously normal after everything. We said vows we had written ourselves, and mine did not mention family wounds or survival or how hard it had been to get there. Because despite what my mother might believe, not every microphone in my life belongs to a lesson. We laughed once when he stumbled over a word. Somebody in the back sniffled dramatically. The officiant smiled like she had seen worse. Which she probably had. And then suddenly we were married. Just like that. No speech from my father. No controlled tears from my mother. No sister clutching a bouquet like a hostage prop. Just us. The reception was exactly what we had remade it to be. Smaller, louder in a good way, full of actual affection instead of obligation. People danced. People ate. My friend gave another speech and nearly exposed 3 secrets I had not approved for public release. My new husband and I actually had time to speak to people instead of being dragged through some endless performance circuit. The disc jockey was better than the band would have been, and I hope that haunts my parents just enough to be educational. There was one moment, though, late in the evening, when I stepped outside for air, and the sadness came back sharp. I was standing by the side entrance in my dress holding my shoes, because my feet had given up on beauty, and it hit me that I had done it. I had gotten married without them. No dramatic reconciliation. No final grand gesture, just the truth of what my family was and the boundary I had drawn around it. I cried a little out there, not because I wanted them back in, but because endings are still endings even when you chose them. My husband found me, took one look at my face and said, "Hey." Just that. Hey. Like I was not difficult, not too much, not embarrassing, not the reason a family was strained, just me. I leaned into him and said I was happy and sad and furious and relieved all at once. He said that sounded about right. Then we went back inside because our cake was being served and, dysfunctional bloodlines aside, I had every intention of eating the expensive frosting in peace. Our honeymoon was short, local, and exactly what I needed. We drove a few hours, stayed by a lake, ate diner breakfasts, and barely touched our phones. My husband never acted like the wedding should have magically cured everything. He let me be happy and bruised at the same time, which felt more loving than any speech could have. On the second morning, I checked my email and found a message from my father full of words like grace, compromise, perspective, and not one clear apology. It read like a sermon written by a man trying very hard not to stand near the actual point. I didn't answer. I archived it, blocked the address, and went back outside where my coffee was getting cold and the water looked calm enough to borrow for a minute. When we got home, my mother sent a letter. Real paper, real stamp, same nonsense. She wrote that mothers make mistakes, that she had done her best, and that maybe one day I would understand how hard it is to love two daughters equally when they need different things. That line sat in my chest like a stone because even there, even in her version of reaching out, she was still justifying the imbalance instead of naming it. A few weeks later, I heard my sister's marriage was already shaky, partly because the honeymoon money drama had spilled into everything else. I didn't celebrate. I also didn't feel surprised. My parents told relatives I had rejected generous help out of jealousy, which was predictable enough to be boring. I sent one calm message to the few people I cared about, said the wedding had been wonderful and I would not discuss private family issues through gossip, and left it there. Life got ordinary again, which turned out to be the best part. I went back to work. My husband forgot the laundry sometimes. We wrote thank you cards at the kitchen table and argued about where to hang wedding photos. Every now and then, the grief still hit, usually over something small and stupid, but the relief came with it. Near the holidays, my mother texted from an unknown number, "I miss you. I hope marriage is making you softer." That sentence told me everything. She still wanted the version of me that could be bent. I wrote back once and said I was happy, married, and not interested in pretending the past meant something other than what it did. If she ever wanted a relationship with me, it would have to start with honesty, not another request for me to be easier to manage. Then I blocked that number too. There was no miracle after that. No dramatic family repair, no sudden self-awareness, no scene where everybody cried and finally told the truth. What I got was smaller and better. I got peace that did not require me to stay confused. I got a marriage that began in a room where I felt safe. I got to stop auditioning for fairness from people committed to misunderstanding me. And I got to learn that my mother was accidentally right about one thing. Starting marriage with financial maturity was a great idea. We just had to remove her from the budget first.